This like collective model of let's assess is really powerful. Just having been largely raised in the United States and in places like New York, where we have deep community, but as a person who migrated there, the first orientation to being a U.S. citizen is, especially in the Bronx, don't look at nobody, don't talk to nobody. And so then you build community around that. It's like, how do you fight individualism in the context of community?
Welcome to Spirit and Liberation, the podcast where we bridge the sacred and the political, where ancestral wisdom meets the front lines of organized movement. Every episode, we bring you into conversation with spiritual practitioners, political organizers, and healers who are weaving ancestral wisdom into the work of liberation. We'll discuss everything from community-based care systems to the often unseen spiritual frameworks that accompany our movements. Whether you're a longtime student or initiate of African and Indigenous spiritual practices, or you're just starting to explore these paths, this space is for you. I am your host, Jeanette Charles Marquez, and I'm an organizer, historian, and IFA practitioner who is deeply committed to liberation. In this episode, we're diving deep into the heart of what it means to organize from a place of spirit. Today, we have the privilege to be joined by Manuela Arciniegas, a powerhouse of wisdom, culture, and care. Manuela is a mother of four, a priestess of Shango in the Lukumi tradition, a Nayoka Yaya of Palo Mayombe, and an Omo Awo, a student and initiate of Ifa. She's also a drummer, cultural organizer of Afro-Caribbean traditions, and a philanthropic leader supporting education justice and community organizing. She's also a somatics healing coach for women of color in the social justice movement. Manuela's brilliance is not just in her titles, but in how she shows up. Whether she's leading from the drum or organizing cultural spaces, she always returns to spirit as a way to chart the path forward. In this conversation, we talk about how traditions like Ifa, Lukumi, and Palo Mayombe offer essential tools and paradigms for organizing in the face of racial capitalism, and as Manuela says, the sheer weight of living in these times. Manuela reminds us that we don't organize alone. In every Afro-Diasporic tradition that she's a part of, there's one simple truth: nothing is done alone. Before we jump into this episode, we want to go over a few terms. When we talk about Lukumi, we're talking about a tradition with roots in the Yoruba spiritual system, rooted in Cuba, and that revolves around honoring and working with the Orisha, spiritual forces connecting to nature and the elements. Palo Mayombe is another Afro-Diasporic tradition with roots in the Congo. And then there's Ifa, a system of divination, philosophy, and spiritual guidance from the Yoruba cosmology. Ifa's teachings are passed down from generation to generation through Odu, sacred verses which hold Ifa's infinite wisdom. You'll hear us talking about these traditions at different points throughout the episode. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Obviously, you are a practitioner of multiple traditions, and I would love for you to elaborate on how you're practicing your traditions now in kind of the midst of our current times.
That's such a great question. I think coming out of the pandemic, I have been in deep thought about how to be more intentional around my practice. What became really apparent to me is the essential need to practice in a very personal way. Like I needed time to sit, to grieve, to heal, to recalibrate. I felt like my whole being was trying to catch up to post-pandemic world. In this season, 2024, end of year, 1 week shy of elections, trying to recalibrate to rising authoritarianism, fascism, rapidly changing times, drastic climate change. And I think just as like a human in community and family, I noticed the rate of processing and the rate and speed at which I usually move in my leadership in philanthropy or in the cultural work as a drummer, as a priestess in a few traditions and holding space for people, that what I need is to slow down and be more privileged, more time for self and reconnection before continuing to always be in community, continuing to tend to others as a mother, as an executive director, as a group leader, as a the yaya of a temple. I think more and more it's the personal practice time, the various traditions that I belong to, my Boveda and my Spiritism tradition, my time to meditate in front of Nkisi and my Palo Mayombe tradition, my time for study and learning Odu and my apprenticeship in Ifa with my Baba Ifa, Agbola Jose Rodriguez, and the Secundering Temple with Chief Solagba de Popola. Just that personal self-reflection time, I think, is helping my consciousness catch up and make meaning of what is happening now, which feels like a lot. Feels like a lot. I'm also gravitating to people who are searching for a deeper meaning in spirituality, to make meaning of these rapidly changing times, and are trying to create beloved community, sacred community, rooted in repair, rooted in education, rooted in weaving in diagnosis of self, of community, of nature, of family into how they lean into the tradition. So that means a lot of organizers, artists, educators, families, and even some of the entrepreneurs and I'm exposed to who gravitate towards sacred practices because they're stuck between the role of spirit and how to navigate racial capitalism, which is a lot.
Yes, definitely. You touched on so many really interesting points. And I think this last piece too about how we activate and tap into these traditions in the midst of racial capitalism and decaying empire and the organizing that's happening on the streets. I'm curious how you see and understand these practices in relationship to how we build our movements.
Yeah. I think it's like rooted in the principles Sankofa. Like we always have to go back to know where we're going. The project of racial capitalism is designed to dehumanize and produce amnesia around our inherent worth and dignity and our interconnectedness. And so I feel like a lot of our folks they realize that how we live and what the stories we've been told about ourselves don't make sense with how we feel and what we value we bring to our families, our communities. They don't make sense with how essential we are, honestly, to even keep empire going. The sheer percentage of the we in as people of color in a global context, the closeness and proximity to land and nature and stewardship that Black, Brown, Indigenous people hold. It makes the world go round, literally. And as people search for like affirmation in cosmologies and worldviews that are public, accessible, in public discourse, even in the mainstream, I think they're looking for affirmation that like where they're feeling dissonance between who we are, our rich cultural heritage, our values, our essential nature, our spirituality, our orientation towards collective struggle, collective survival, collective resilience is not what we've been indoctrinated to absorb in, let's say, public education in the public school system. It's not what's mainstream in the media. There's spurts now that are making their way into the public imaginary. So think like Wakanda, Black Panthers, Afrofuturism, and the way the whole spirit and massive swaths of people like breathe relief when they see alternative societies in these mainstream spaces. I think it's through the hard work of folks who have deep connection to ancient, to tradition, to spirit, or just like a collective consciousness that's saying, hey, there's something else here. We're going to move towards a feeling of release, a feeling of groundedness, a feeling of connection. And what we've been taught about where that lives doesn't resonate. We've always known that. Colonization said it's Christianity. It said it's capitalism. It said it's accumulate wealth. It said even reinforcing colorism and it's devaluing of the social sector, of teachers, of nurses, of educators, of the people who lean in with care and tending. And I think they're looking for culture. They're looking for spirit. They're looking for a new way. And ironically, the way is by looking in the past and our present, an exciting future. Like Ifa, for example, talks about the future. What's the future and how do we become better? By revisiting lessons from the past baked into the corpus, right? Into Odu. This is not a new thing, how to navigate a human condition. There are lessons and it has been codified into a sacred system. And we are still holding, like, we actually don't know what's next. How do we prepare and fortify ourselves for the unknown? Which is why you consult the oracle. This is why you divine. This is why you reach for elders. This is why you reach for wisdom. And that's the only reason we made it this far. And I think that's like what people are feeling. This is actually the way to continue and orient towards the present and the future.
I'm curious what you might recommend to folks who have been in a tradition similar to Ifa, or maybe have not been in a tradition and are feeling called to tap into spirit. What are some recommendations or advice you might have?
You know, there's so much out there in books and on the internet. It could be a slippery slope. Some channels will not serve you. Do not scroll and surf there. How do you know? I think start with the cultural institutions, right? The beacons of our people's culture that have survived and endured. What are the longest running temples of particular religious traditions? Do they have public programming that you could visit with that's non-committal but is educational? What's online from places like, Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute, their massive archive on the eve of their 50th anniversary? Who are some of the scholars who write about these things? Who are the artists and cultural producers who perform the elements of our sacred traditions, right? What are those songs like? Who are the dance teachers, the drummers, who are the elders? That's like for how to engage from as an outsider looking in. And then also ask your family. Like, I'm sure there's someone in your family who has a footprint or 1 or 2, 3 degrees removed, or somebody who knows somebody who can vet and vouch for an honest, caring, principled person to beacon to help you guide you on your journey. Referral, referral, referral. And take your time. Take your sweet, sweet time. Read about the cosmology. See if it resonates with your worldview. I think that's some of the places that I would recommend people start.
Knowing some of your work in kind of intergenerational spaces is this bridge that often happens in our traditions between elders and young people. And, just how do you feel that those relationships have also even shaped your outlook on these different cosmologies and practices?
I think about the project of colonization and the transatlantic slave trade, where it required the decimation of familial relationships and intergenerational bonds. And a lot of us still very much live and move with that trauma, where we might not know who our daddies are, or where mom, grandma are the backbone and the sole adult providers of a family, which shapes how they show up, shapes how they mother. Or if we know and are reaching for our fathers, our elders, they've been attacked systemically. And so there's things around how they hold their masculinity, maybe, or their feeling of like empowerment and rightful balanced presence, right? Not to dwell in the negative, but I do think like even eldership has suffered attacks. Some communities, some families, the elders didn't make it past 60, 65. And so they didn't get that old by design, because the systems and the society was unfriendly to their survival and required their death to reap benefit, profit. I think we're practicing returning to good eldership and youth interconnectedness always. As just as like a 40-something-year-old mom, I find myself repeating the things my parents said and then really trying to sit in the question that I think good youth and elder relationships should have spaciousness for, which is help me understand why you think that way. And I have an offering or feedback or a different perspective as a young person. Is there space in this relationship for me to lift that up for you? I think that's something that is important. Just having funded youth organizing for a long time, we do need to support elders to make space for youth voices and questions and challenge us to think about how to do things in different ways. And we as young people, I used to be a young person, yelder. That made me feel like a yelder. I feel like we need to also like take care of our elders. In the last couple of years, I've heard of really essential elders in the cultural arts space who died alone in their homes because they didn't have retirements. There were no communities checking in on them. They gave so much for very little financial remuneration. Lots of ache, I'm sure that they gathered because of that work, but no one checked on them and the systems weren't designed and rooted in care to make sure they're okay. And that's heartbreaking. Let's say in the cultural space, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Puerto Rican, Afro-Dominican, roots drum traditions like that our beautiful elders died alone and nobody checked on them is heartbreaking. So there's a lot of work for us to do to practice staying interconnected across generations and to find the right balance around like making sure traditions are actually relevant in changing times. That's hard because a lot of what we've seen for relevance is like the infiltration of capitalist values in like Orisha Lukumi practice, for example, all the practices. You want to be a priest and tend to community and have it be sustainable to you. There's some ways where the design of these practices, how do you support and pay for your necessities as a parent? There's a mismatch. 'Cause I know folks who are younger priests who love and want to replicate everything the elders told them. They want to do it right. And it's not viable. You can't charge the derechos you were charging in the 80s and be like, that was what Padrino said. A reading is $21. I'm like, that gets you from here to the corner store. But if you made $21 in a 40-hour work week, you cannot pay your bills. And we know you're not doing 8 hours worth of stuff. So that's just like the ways we adapt to the times to make sure people can sustain their priesthood and their eldership, that they have spaces and are called into communities to share wisdom. It's a challenge that we have to collectively design around.
I'm wondering if you can share a little bit, because you did mention earlier on just your own journey studying to be a priestess as well in Ifa. What does that look like for you? And is there kind of wisdom from that experience that you feel can inform our broader movement and communities around liberation and healing?
Oh, such a good question. I'm an eternal student. And I hope I'm learning from all the cantazos, the headbangs, the trips and falls that are a natural part of life. And I think this is a special question for people who show up in their lives as leaders or have leadership requirements, positions. I think, I remember the first time I said, I want to learn what this is. I went and followed the folks who felt like they were in the know and had bandwidth to introduce new people to a cultural practice, a political movement, a religious tradition. And they were often like the artists, or they were the folks who didn't have to show up at a 9 to 5. That was who I got exposed to, which meant that they had a little bit more flexibility, were definitely not well resourced, and were like living their mission, their values, not a lot of money. I remember thinking, I want to learn and walk alongside you, but I have some constraints as a mother. as a person from a low income family where I actually have to work. And so that means I got to do my work and then meet you after work or on the weekends, kids in tow, feeling like I was working extra hard and learning twice as slow as my peers. And that's just the reality, right? Like we all make our choices. Everybody figure it out from where you're positioned. Just keep walking towards the light. If you want it, like you got to do it. So I've practiced like slow and steady and accept where I'm at. I wish I could do more. Try not to beat myself up around it. But still like, hey man, like I love this. That's why I do it. So how much can I do every day? How much sleep can I lose to get in there and do it? How do I do it in a way where there's still health? It's a dance. It's a dance. I think for mothers of more than, I don't know, we got stuff to do. So we want to do it and we don't want it to be stressful. We don't want it to chip at our dignity, but it's definitely effortful, it feels like. And it's also really fruitful and rewarding because that's the place of peace. That's the place of connection and alignment. It feels really good. So I might be speaking from my end of week, I'm tired energy. But it's actually like what keeps me going. It's the fuel to keep going. Like without walking closer to spirit, I have no idea where we would be. I feel like I would be so lost right now. So I'm grateful for the journey.
A lot of what we talk about right at this intersection of spirit and liberation is this question around collective care and creating systems of care for our collective healing. And as someone who's been in our traditions for decades, I'm curious kind of for you, how you see our traditions contributing to this kind of broader healing justice and búsqueda, like this search and this quest to really create new systems in lieu of what we currently have inherited from colonialism.
No person is an island unto themselves. And whatever is awry or ill in a person or a home or a community first needs to be diagnosed. And the diagnosis is rooted in data, information, and knowledge about what has happened, what is happening, why is it happening. And I see the power of our traditions when we gather as a flock to pool the collective wisdom of what is happening, why is it happening, and what should we do about it. So this collective model of let's assess is really powerful. And, just having been largely raised in the United States and in places like New York, where we have deep community, but it's, as a person who migrated there, the first orientation to being a US citizen is please do not, especially in the Bronx, don't look at nobody. Don't talk to nobody. Keep your head down. And so then you build community around that. It's like, how do you fight individualism in the context of community? So, religion, African diaspora spiritual tradition requires collective. Like you can do a lot on your own. And that's kind of how we started our conversation, how important it is for me to sit, be still, and commune with spirit. For me, it's essential. And you can't do anything by yourself. So you build the muscle of collaboration, convivencia, co-living, co-sharing, being in community with others. And that's actually like what has allowed our survival and healing. And that muscle, it sounds simple, but it's threatened at every corner with technology, with your phone and the Facebook. I just think of the way my kids play versus other kids used to play when we were little. And I'm just like, there's so much here making it easy to sever ties from each other and depart from our interdependence. And we have to resist that. And our technology is definitely, our traditions are like a sure shot way of preventing that from happening.
Yes, definitely. I feel like when you mentioned earlier this piece on how we navigate the conditions of racial capitalism. And I think our traditions have a lot in terms of answers and strategies for us to move forward and really think about how we can achieve our liberation in our lifetimes and actually move into this next phase of what the world has in store with us with dignity and integrity and having our values and our humanity recognized and affirmed in many ways.
And that wisdom is distributed in
Mhm.
a very intentional way. So you actually cannot get to the answer of the what is next until you engage as many elders or young people. You know, sometimes they turn to what's the young person in the room think? What's the role that only the child here could play? Because of all of the essence imbued in each one of us that is required to make the collective ritual, the collective journey along the way. So there's like a role for everybody, which is really beautiful.
I'm curious if there's any last reflections you may want to share or have for folks who will listen to this who, you know, are either organizing and deep in the political trenches, or for our spiritual brethren who are maybe trying to figure out how to politicize their practice. But, you know, for everyone who's listening who really wants to create that bridge between spirit and liberation.
Yeah, I think I love this opportunity to make visible the presence of organizers who are steeped in African-based spiritual traditions. I love this opportunity for them to convene, for us to convene and make meaning of what is happening now and use our tools and our experiences on like, what does it take to organize our way out of this? I think that that is a gift. And then for folks on either side of the equation who are like seeking each other, the priests, the healers, the spiritual practitioners, and then the organizers, the activists, the folks who are impacted and want to do something about it. I love the way we can face each other and look at the overlap in desire, in values, and in skills. Like the priestesses of a religious house know how to organize events. They know how to manage budgets. They know how to distribute labor and collective work. They know how to tell stories and they know have wisdom and make meaning. They know how to diagnose ills and injustice and articulate a strategy towards balance and healing. They know how to endure in difficult times. They know how to speak to power and harness power. They know how to devise strategy through their divination and their collective assessment and their wisdom. They know how to endure and walk a long life and orient towards abundance, orient towards health and wealth, orient towards repair and healing. And I feel like at the heart of a lot of the organizing movements I'm hearing right now, these are the aspirations that are actually have already been articulated in African-based spiritual traditions as the next worlds, the abolitionist worlds we want to build. They're already rules, modes of conduct, instruction that has always need to be made and to come to the light, has always needed to be communicated and taught. And that's why the practices and the traditions have longevity, because we've all been solving for the same situations and challenges from different orientations. The opportunity to have liberation, social, racial justice movements go deeper into indigenous tradition, I think, is to really lean in to worldviews, practices, and prayers and knowings that were created outside of colonization and oppression. Some would argue actually it hasn't been, at least in the syncretisms and the contending with these forces is a global affair. Whether you're in Nigeria or in Cuba or in New York, you can't divorce that. And yet I think that for the seekers and the folks with a vision and their eyes towards health and repair, wellness and justice, they're going to find the originary kernels in the cosmology and the practices that are actually some of the technology that we need to move a justice agenda, that we need to move a repair and a well-being agenda. It's in there already. And so this is a chance to learn more about the tools in these respective spheres and to see that the expression of African-based traditions as actually the work of always organizers, because folks have always been organizing. If you care and you practice these traditions, at the heart of many of them is the mandate to orient towards someone else and spread that light. You're an organizer. Because you could do this just for you, but you will never do it just by yourself. It's impossible. That's impossible. You will be stuck. You will need to consult for wisdom. You might need ritual. You're going to need others. And we're always reaching for wellness and repair. And that's what is here, has been here. There's so much here we need to rediscover, uncover, reconnect to. That's why our elders are so important. That's why study is so important. That's why community to support you in walking a journey is so important. There's a little bit of here for everybody. I want to tell you a story about Kalunga, the original supreme god of the Bakongo people. Kalunga is the black matter. In the beginning, there was nothing. And then there was a great big bang, a spark of life. And Sambi Mbungu was born. Kalunga was before it was even was. In the beginning, when there was nothing, the nothingness or black matter was Kalunga. Kalunga is mystery. It is the nothingness that something was born from. Just like the bottom of the ocean, which none of us will ever know, Kalunga is the greatest of the mysteries. Kalunga is complete within itself. She needs or wants nothing from no one. In the beginning, when there was nothing, Kalunga grew lonely. In Kalunga's loneliness, it gave birth to that great spark of life called Sambi, which means the terrific, horrific, universal force. And then Sambi began to expand in explosive ways, creating the sun, the moon, the planets. Earth began as a great ball of fire, and over time it cooled down. Sambi sent the Mpungu, the powerful deities and forces of nature, to begin the process of creating life. At first, on the planet, there was nothing but water. But Sambi sent down Nsasi, the Mpungu of lightning. Nsasi sent down a huge lightning bolt, which turned and created a stone. And this stone then turned and became a turtle shell. And this turtle shell is now the land that we all stand upon. Kalunga is the owner of Kumasa, the land of the ancestors, the place where our petitions and prayers go. They are delivered straight to our ancestors through Kalunga, and they're heard by the supreme original force of the universe. After some invasion by neighboring ethnic groups in the Central African region of the Congo, the place that I am talking about, the source of this creation story, all the supreme deity known as Sambi was originally understood to be called Kalunga. It was understood in its feminine aspect as Kalunga, the Great Mother, the giver of life, the essential life-giving force of water. Kalunga also has a masculine aspect known as Kalunga Ngo, the bringer of death, the great judge. For the Congo, life and death are only different phases of an essential and external cycle of existence that never ends. The Kalunga line just shifts ever so much on its axis. The horizon that we all see separates the land of the living from the land of the dead. The place where we all come from, life, water, mother, is also the place where we all return. The ones who will always be closest to God will always be the women because of our life-giving power and our sacred connection to water.
Thank you again for joining us on Spirit and Liberation, brought to you by the Latinx Therapist Action Network. And a special thank you to Manuela Arciniegas for her reflections and the way she holds space for all of us to remember our strength in these times. If this episode spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone in your circle. Spirit and Liberation is hosted by Francisca Porchas Coronado and Jeanette Charles Marquez. Today's episode was produced and edited by Phil Serkis.